Hi everyone, my name is Mike Lombardi. I'm a local here in Phoenix, so I see a lot of familiar faces out here. Thanks for carving out today and tomorrow. Hopefully you've gotten a lot of value out of your morning and this early afternoon. I know I have, and I'm thinking about this stuff all the time. The perspective that I am bringing to my talk is from the work I do as a digital forensics and incident response practitioner. I don't have a full-time job other than running my own company. So a little bit of background on me is I formed Vertegrate back in 2004. I got into digital forensics back in 2008, and I've been doing that type of work, working with law firms and their clients on various engagements for almost 10 years now. Proactively engaged with companies as well to do some of what we're talking about here. How can we be better? Be faster. So in addition to that, you'll see me volunteering at HCCIA, ISSA. If you have not joined those organizations in your local communities, I encourage you to seek those out. There's a lot of great like-minded people in each of those. You also see that I love sand certs, so I got to work on another one here shortly, but I just haven't quite figured out which one to do. So before I jump into my presentation, I do want to give a special shout out to Michael Goff. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the site, Malware Archaeology. Also Kurt Fald. I met him on a Microsoft engagement. He's got some PowerShell scripts that have been sitting around for a while that help us with the XPath filter. The XPath filter is the filter behind the Windows Event Viewer. It's ugly and cumbersome, and he helps us with that if all we are is stuck with Windows Event Viewer. And as somebody who's often coming in from the outside, I don't get a choice as to what the hand is that I'm dealt. So my presentation is going to focus on primarily what you can do when you don't have a commercial solution. If you have a commercial solution, great. You probably know it better than I do. So what we're going to cover, a little history on Windows Event Logs. We've got a lot to cover, so I won't spend too much time on that. We're going to get into Windows Advanced Auditing. What can we get? Why do we want it? Where to deploy it? And how to find it. We've already touched on a lot of this. 4688, that's my favorite event, by far. Love it. We are going to talk about some of the other ones, though. Finding a needle in a stack of needles, right? So how do we go about getting at data that's actually valuable? Because we've got all sorts of stuff that is clouding that clearer picture. And finally, other valuable events, so that if you don't have advanced auditing turned on, what could you do today with a default logging configuration? So a little bit of history. We had the big three: system, application, and security, right? And back in the day, we had 9 categories. That was it. They weren't turned on. Then I think Service Pack came along and Windows XP, and we got some. And then if we were interested, maybe we turned on some more. And then there were, the SIM greatest hits, right? All the failed logons. Okay, well, that didn't do us much good when we weren't logging successful logons. So all those brute force attacks was like, well, did they get in? I don't know. So I just checked. Vista was released in 2006. So it's kind of funny that we're talking about this stuff over 10 years later. And the reason we're talking about it, at least from my point of view, is that when I get in on engagements, is that advanced auditing is rarely taken advantage of. And so that's why I feel like we should be talking about this, because advanced auditing took us from 9 all the way up to 53. And we have these 53 categories on the slide here that we get by turning on advanced auditing. Now, each one of these are configurable. Where we're going to spend most of our time is in this, the middle pane under object access and detailed tracking. And we'll do, like I said, a little bit on the obligatory log on, log off. And for those AD admins out there, we won't have time to cover directory services, but that's a good place to keep your eye on for changes. So what do you need to know? Again, it's off by default, so check it. If you check it on a Windows 7 machine, run that orange command. Don't look at your GUI. Your GUI is going to tell you nothing's configured. So in Windows 8, I believe we actually start to get feedback from this. Audit Paul, nice and simple. It'll show you the output we just had on the previous screen. So what do you need to know? You're going to need a bigger log, right? Defaults, not so good. So Microsoft, and I'll get the reference to their guidance so that when you go back to your shops and you say, we got to turn on our logs, we got to get a bigger log, is that you can point them to that TechNet article that you always have to point somebody to when you're making a recommendation that affects a Microsoft system. So 1 to 4 gigs. Don't get crazy on every single one because there is a cap. So what do we want to talk about? I mentioned log on, log off. I'm going to take a little bit on the log on type. Most of you probably are aware of what each log on type does, but refresher for those. Process creation. I like termination too. Because the digital forensics and the incident response work that I do, I like a timeline. I like to know when something started and when something stopped. Same with log on and log off. If we're trying to put hands on a keyboard, we like to know when the stuff stopped as well. Filtering platform connection. I haven't heard anybody talk about this yet because it's probably way too noisy for most. I don't recommend it on file servers, but on workstations, it's pretty useful. Commandline, we've heard about that. PowerShell has its own logging as well, and we'll talk about how to turn that on. Object access file system registry, file share. If you've got the recipe to Coca-Cola, what rings have you put around that data? Think of, there's data that we don't care about, the data that is highly sensitive, it's intellectual property. We want to know what's happening to those files. Who's copying them? Who's looked at them? I mean, a lot of the engagements I get are, well, did they copy the files? There isn't a log per se on a workstation that says they copied these files. Now, we infer a lot of this through other things like link file analysis and shell bags in the registry. But you guys don't need to have all that. I mean, you're welcome to hire me and come in and I'll send you a bill for telling you what happened there. But let's teach you how to fish so that you can say, okay, what's going on? Is there a rogue admin? Are they taking the path of least resistance and saying, I can't make this work, so I'm just going to give everybody admin rights? Let's take a look at that. So, log on, log off. Everybody is familiar with 4624. Log on types is something that anybody who's looking at logs should just know these off the top of their head. 3 is very noisy. 2 and 10 are typically where I tend to focus when I'm looking at trying to figure out what was going on. And again, we've got our 4634, which is our log off. So again, we know when was the user on the machine. So for a daily operational perspective, if you ever want a gut check, well, boss, I'm working all the time. What's, and it doesn't work. Yes, you had a question. So the question was, can you take the information in the 4624 and see whether there was an impersonation across the network for the logon?
No, I keep the log entry itself. It's like impersonation, like with delegations, like that. Actually, the log data.
So I would be looking at the source, workstation source, and account. So if you're looking at, say, a $ machine name versus domain/user account, I would begin there to say, okay, well, is this going to line up? And then you'll often have an accompanying event on the local machine, as well as you'll have your, I think it's 4776 on your domain controllers, and you could line those up. So, process creation. And process creation is going to get a lot of airtime today and tomorrow, I think. Again, this is why I love it. It tells me what started when and where it started from. So, what could be useful in the new process name other than evil.exe? Like maybe did it run out of, app data temp, right? Or somewhere else, or temporary internet files Outlook. We can infer where this file came from. It also gives us our process ID in hex. Process termination, how long did this thing run? Do we still have to be worried about it? Again, it's establishing that timeline. Process ID also ties back. So if we've got multiples, we can keep those all straight with that same process ID. Windows filtering platform. 5156, this thing is crazy noisy, but I suggest you turn it on and give it a shot. Anybody see anything kind of goofy on the example I put up there?
Why is Windows Word talking outside?
Right. Why is Word reaching out to a public IP? So in this case, this is actually a token that I embedded in the Word document. So canary tokens, people familiar with that thing? Yeah, so this is the Word version of it. When I send out sensitive files, I will often tokenize it in the background, and then I will get a ping from Canary that says, hey, it's open. And if they let out 445, I'll get OS fingerprinting, as well as the Office version, and all sorts of good stuff. I love it. And I'll also know that, hey, they let 445 out of their firewall. It's probably isn't a good thing. But so that's just with that basic thing. And you can see if you've got a macro, I mean, boom, it's right there, right? Where did it reach out to? Let's immediately cut that off at the network source, and then we can continue to triage the rest of the event. We also have a process ID in here, but it's in decimal. So we can cross-correlate. And we can say, all right, let's get everything from, with a little bit of math, figure out all of the events that were related to a certain process executing. In this case, we do some hex, we do some decimal, we got our 2, we do our filtering, and here we go. We know everything that's happening. So, logging the command line. Again, this is something that people have talked about, and we'll see more and more of it. My only cautionary note on this one is if you've got anything that's passing credentials, just be aware that that's going to end up in the event log. So maybe rework that or use an account that's highly restricted and still continue to have it. So you have to have audit process creation on in order for the command piece to work. So, but what's really nice is you can see the extra info that you get there. So we've got CMD, or actually ipconfig. People looking for cmd.exe in their logs? Yeah, just a few. Anybody looking for ComSpec? Yes, yes. So, how many know that ComSpec is just another way of saying CMD? Yeah. So you'll see that in a lot of your logs. When you're looking at them, you don't see CMD, make sure you start looking for ComSpec as well. So PowerShell. PowerShell is like the next generation of command line. It's wonderful. I've rolled my own incident response just using PowerShell, which is great because, again, I'm often coming into organizations. I have no idea what they've got. Everything but one line will run on PowerShell 2.0. That last line needs PowerShell 3.0. And we can collect registry keys and certain executable locations, all sorts of good stuff, and be able to triage. I typically look for persistence because those are the engagements I'm on. Somebody's had a bad day, and they've actually had that bad day for months, so they've survived the reboot. But if you do want to turn on PowerShell, you've got to at least either have your domain upgraded to really 2016, but who's at that point yet, right? So these new ADMXs will give you the additional GPO switches so that you can turn on your PowerShell module and transcription in your script block. And some of this is right here. In a separate log, we've got our PowerShell log with 4104, and we can see in here, this is a quick, it's a ping loop. I mean, if I wanted to get to know the network, maybe I just run a quick little ping sweep and see who comes back, or an NS lookup, or any of that, and here we have. It's all sitting right here for us. So again, you get that question, well, how long has this been going on for? Our logs are sitting there. Now, whether you decide to feed all of this to a SIM or filter it with Windows Event Forwarding and then send it on, or just leave it on the workstation, which is what I propose for organizations that are just starting out, because it's more than what you had before. If they clear the logs, so be it. They cleared the logs. The Windows Event logs themselves are very difficult to tamper with. It's an all or a nothing, right? So I can't just extract or delete a single event entry from a Windows event log. I can clear the whole thing, sure, but I won't be able to get I can't scrub just my evil. So we've talked about what's happened. Now let's look at this from an ops perspective. Monitoring those sensitive areas, the recipe to Coca-Cola. You want to know what's happening here. Here's a sample one of 4663, and I'm actually monitoring the sample task folder. I want to know what's happening in here. And I can see that data was written, and it was actually appended. I had a file in there already. I wanted to change some stuff. I went in there, and I did that. And you can see that you've got the account name in there as well. So you can go back to that user, that admin, what have you, and say, hey, what are you doing over here? This works for permission changes. Again, adds, deletes, views. So views are very good. You get somebody who has given their notice. You walk back through the logs a week later, or a week prior, and you can see on the server that that's the case. I love the intellectual property cases that I get, and so they're plugging in USBs all the time. The machine's been alive for 4 years. We've got lots of USBs. If they were smart, they would have used one of those USBs, but instead everybody comes in with a new USB, and they plug it in the week before. And you wonder, hey, why is this device being plugged in? Oh, and by the way, it's a 64 gig Kingston with a serial number of this, and we would like you to hand that over to us at the next deposition, attorney meeting, what have you. But what this will do is help with whether something has been accessed. Same with the registry values. So what do we want to track when we do those? These are the suggestions that I would put forth to you. They're also the ones that Michael Goff has on his site, Malware Archaeology. So it will give you some of that insight. Again, tune this to your needs. You're going to have to set the basically, you're going to have to go to whatever location you want to monitor, and you're going to have to set these. There are some global ways to do that as well. We don't have enough time to get into that today, but there's plenty of info out there to get you started on it. So since we were talking about scheduled tasks, there's also something here. I love scheduled tasks for detecting persistence because the bad guys are using it. They've moved away from the run keys. right? I mean, yeah, sure, you still find them. I had a case recently where all the L&K, or the link files, their arguments have been modified to respawn the malware that they had planned on the machine. That was the most novel kind of persistence mechanism that I'd seen, but these guys were also using scheduled tasks. So it's a great way to maintain persistence, and when you want to know when that scheduled task has been created, you've got your 4698 event and the security log. And these are all security events in the security log so far, with the exception of that PowerShell. So, we've covered a fair amount, and you say, all right, well, this is all great, but it's too much. I don't know where to start. Everybody's watching Mr. Robot, right? Oh, yeah. Okay. No spoilers, though. I'm not caught up. So, all right. So, advanced auditing. We want to start small. Like I said, 4688. If I had to trade in 4624 for 4688, I would. I just because the process shows the account that used it anyway, right? So I mean, if there's anything you take away from today, from all the speakers, is 4688, right? Process termination, failure, take them or leave them. I kept them on the slide. Success is really what we're interested in. Log on, log off, of course, yeah, we do want those. But other object access events, that's going to get us our scheduled task. Again, this is an area of persistence that we like, that attackers like even better. So why would we want to track audit policy change events? Right? It's like somebody's got to watch, the watchdog. So we want to know if somebody put the watchdog to sleep and said, okay, well, let's no longer monitor all the stuff that they want to pay attention to anymore. So that's why we're going to do that. We're going to object those events. Command line, PowerShell logging. I think the value is self-evident once you see the entries. There's so much juicy detail in there that why wouldn't you want this? I know that in larger organizations you can get some pushback for having to implement anything, but again, the value is just incredible. So once we've done those basic events, we want to build from there. So advanced auditing with object access. Oh, we got a question over here. So this comment from the audience is that the 4104, the PowerShell event, can be challenging to essentially send to another solution.
Well, columnar data stores specifically because they rely upon speed, search, and storage through the functionality fields.
Okay, through columnar data storage, just because of their size and being able to search across that. And you've got the luxury of those solutions.
Yes.
Yeah. So for those, again, obviously you want to test drive the car before you take it off the lot for good. But if you can't get it into the solution, leave it on the box, and hopefully it's there after the fact if you do need to do a further investigation. Windows Event Forwarding, which was also mentioned. You run some filters on that and say, hey, this looks like it's more interesting and that we should send this further along the chain. Object access. So we talked about this again. This is making sure that your most valuable data has more eyes on it than your regular data. So that you know when things are interacted upon prior to, say, somebody leaving the firm or the company. Again, if an attacker's going after something, if you always want to get an alert whenever this very specific event occurs on those files, you've got that. Registry is also very helpful Because again, we've got, oh, let's just do basic stuff like somebody installs software, right? Usually the run key may change or some other software registry will change. That might be something useful. We've got, in 4624, I like to look for consent.exe because what does that do? That shows that you get the UAC prompt. And the account associated with that 4624 event is that local admin. So it's a help desk or it's somebody in the IT who's got that secondary account to elevate, and they're doing it, maybe they're abusing it. They're saying, well, yeah, I want to get this on, I want to get that on, and I'll help my friend over here, and so on and so forth, and you can start to see some of that abuse happening. So this will help you get from point A to point B. So keep going. Again, we talked about registry keys. Here's some of the ones that I would start with. So we've got our local machine and our user run keys. These are areas of persistence. The rest of them typically pertain to USB storage. So if you want to know more about who plugged in what where, yeah, there are other ways to get at this. But if you have it at your fingertips and you can answer these questions for the people who are asking you, rather than having to go to somebody else who, is going to run maybe Mark Won's USB forensics, which is super simple to do, but if they didn't know about it, they could simply look at the logs. So if you aren't sure, these are great resources to tune your own advanced auditing. Eventopedia. You can come at it from an event ID. You can come at it from the advanced auditing entry as to whether if I enable this, what event am I going to get, and be able to customize your own. And if you're not sure where to start, then I suggest starting with the logging cheat sheets at malwarearchaeology.com. That's where I started when I got into really diving into logs. So I've turned everything on. Now what? Right? Twin Peaks fans out here? I rarely find them. I watched it, didn't understand it. Anyway. All right, so some tools. Like I said, I'm not going to talk about SIMs. I'm not going to talk about commercial tools. You guys are going to know those better than me. What do you do with free? So Windows Event Viewer, yeah, it'll do it. It's kind of clumsy, it's slow, right? But it's there. Windows Event Util, a little bit better, just because it's Commandline, right? And then lots of free tools, open source. You're going to have some sort of Python Perl to take advantage of them. So you may or may not have that ready to go at the whim. What I like to do is I like to combine PowerShell with the Windows Event Util if I have to. But we're going to start off with the event viewer and Kurt Fald's PowerShell script. What it basically does is, you go into an event and you've got like the plain English and you've got the advanced view and it's all XML. You can also do your filters. Well, and that's custom and that's XML-ish. It's this XPath filter. Kurt's script helps you write that filter. So you say, hey, that event looks like something I'm interested in. If you give me the structure, I can swap values and then tune it to what I want, which gives you a greater granularity than those couple of tick boxes and radio buttons that we get out of Windows Event Viewer. So that's one way to go. But what I like is combining PowerShell with Windows Event Util, because I can pipe that in, I can do a find string for whatever I'm looking for, and then here we have it. So what we've got here on this command is we're going to look for the event ID 4688. We're only looking at the most recent 500. We're going to get it in text format, and we're going to select the string. And people familiar with the context switch and select string? Fine. It's kind of like grep before and after. So that will give us a nice pretty, okay, that's my one event. You tweak that so we're looking 23 lines up and 4 lines down. In addition to that, we can look for other ones like with get win event, same kind of a process, just a little bit different. And I've given you some other examples here. So C script, W script, CMD. And remember, if it's a 64-bit system, these things also live in the syswow folder. So you want to look for both. It's the non-wildcard searching is a little bit of a challenge. So more free tools we have here. And like I said, if you got the platforms to run them, go for it. So we are running out of time. This is normally an hour-long presentation, and I will dive more into why we're doing each of these commands. So what have we got here? If you haven't got any of this, you've got a default out of the box, and I suspect nobody here has default out of the box because you're all smarter than that. But if you did, you get a 20 meg default log size. Task scheduler, you only get 10 megs, right? Security log, maybe you get something, right? Depends on when it was deployed. So you don't have a whole lot. So what else can we do? Well, here's that MicrosoftCabe that I promised, and the font's really small, so you have to go and download the slides, but don't exceed that 16 gig. I haven't really seen any performance hits by turning this stuff on a modern system, so I wouldn't be afraid of that. You will get sysadmins who will freak out, but yeah, start with some workstations, get some file servers on there. So what can you do if you don't have any of this turned on? Well, you probably have 46, 24, and 34. Sure, yeah, start with that. System logs, though, service installation. If there's anything that you look for in the system log, is look for service installation. This is where we find a lot of malware. Had a case, ComSpec being used to call PowerShell to essentially decode a giant base64 string that was an interpreter reverse shell. Out of that, we got attackers' evil IP, outbound ports. We also found internal machines that they were trying to pivot through in order to get out, all by looking for event 7045. The other ones under system logs, yeah, they're there, and they're there a lot. And they're there a lot for very normal reasons. Task scheduler, small log, but you might find something in there that's going to be a default, and then in the modern Windows systems, Windows Defender, maybe. So with that, let's see if anybody's got a few questions.